The Stranger in the Cabin. The five of us had planned this camping trip for months. We'd chosen a secluded area in the mountains, far away from the usual campgrounds, where the only signs of life were the distant calls of wildlife. The air was crisp, and the pine trees towered over us like ancient sentinels. On the second day, after hours of hiking, we stumbled across an old cabin, half hidden by overgrown bushes. It was a crumbling, weathered thing, looking more like it had grown out of the forest than been built there. The windows were shattered, and the door hung on one rusted hinge. Jake, always the adventurous one, insisted on checking it out. "Just a quick look," he said. "Maybe it'll be cool inside." The rest of us were hesitant, but Jake pushed the door open with a creak, and we reluctantly followed him in. The cabin smelled like rotting wood and damp earth. Inside, there were scattered remnants of whoever had once lived there, a broken table, a few rusty tools, and an old iron stove. Dust hung in the air, disturbed only by our intrusion. We were about to leave when Sarah found something odd. On the far wall, scratched into the wood, were tallies, hundreds of them, like someone had been counting the days, weeks, maybe even years. At the bottom of the tally marks was a crude drawing of a stick figure standing in the doorway of the cabin. Below that, a single word: watching. That was enough for me. "We should go," I said, backing toward the door. But as I turned to leave, something stopped me. A faint smell, different from the musty scent of the cabin. It was the unmistakable stench of decaying meat. "We're not alone," Jake whispered, his voice barely audible. My heart pounded as we all stood frozen, listening. Then came the sound of footsteps outside, slow, deliberate, crunching through the dead leaves just beyond the cabin. "Is it a bear?" Emily whispered, fear making her voice shake. But we all knew it wasn't. Bears don't walk like that. They don't circle. The footsteps continued, moving around the cabin, closer now, as if whoever or whatever it was trying to get a look inside. Suddenly, there was a loud bang. The remaining hinge snapped, and the cabin door crashed to the ground, splintering as it hit the floor. We scrambled back, pushing against the far wall, eyes wide, but nothing entered. The forest outside was still, dark. "Run," Tom whispered, and we didn't need to be told twice. We bolted out the back of the cabin, sprinting through the trees, not caring about the direction, just desperate to get away. But no matter how fast we ran, the footsteps followed. The sun was setting fast, and the shadows between the trees grew longer, darker. We were far from camp, lost in a maze of unfamiliar trails, when we saw it. Ahead of us, standing among the trees, was a figure, too tall, too thin to be human. Its limbs were all wrong, elongated, unnaturally bent. And its face. It had no face, just smooth, featureless skin stretched over a skull-like shape. We stopped dead in our tracks. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, staring, or at least we thought it was staring. Then it raised one long arm and pointed back toward the cabin. We ran again, not knowing if it was following, but too terrified to look back. Somehow, we made it back to camp, but something was off. Our tents were shredded, sleeping bags torn open as if something, or someone, had been searching for us. That night, we built the largest fire we could and huddled around it, wide-eyed and sleepless, jumping at every snap of a twig, every gust of wind. The next morning, as the sun rose, we packed our things and left in silence. No one spoke of what we saw, but as we made our way back down the mountain, I turned around one last time. In the distance, standing at the edge of the tree line, was the figure, watching us leave. I've never been back to those woods since, and I never will.
I'd heard the rumors about this campground for years. Campers who disappeared without a trace, strange lights flickering through the trees at night, whispered stories of a fire that burned here decades ago, leaving only ashes and shadows behind. The locals called it Deadwood Camp, and they warned me against going. But I wanted to know if the stories were true, to see if I could spend just one night, 24 hours, alone in this cursed place. I arrived around noon, the sun hanging high in the clear blue sky. The campground seemed harmless enough at first, just a patch of dense woods in a clearing where someone had built a fire pit out of old stones. A couple of broken down picnic tables sat scattered around, their wood weathered and splintered. I set up my tent close to the fire pit, telling myself there was nothing to worry about. It was just another night in the woods. I'd done this dozens of times before. But as the day wore on, I noticed the silence. It was too quiet. The kind of quiet that settles in your bones. No birds singing, no leaves rustling in the wind, just an oppressive, heavy stillness. I shrugged it off. Maybe it was just my imagination, fueled by the stories I'd heard. I spent the next few hours setting up camp and gathering wood for a fire. By late afternoon, clouds started to gather, dark and thick, blotting out the sun. A chill crept into the air, and I felt the first twinge of unease. I shrugged it off, telling myself it was just a typical weather change. But as the light dimmed, the campground seemed to change with it. The shadows grew longer, stretching across the ground like dark fingers reaching for me. I built a fire, watching as the flames crackled and danced in the growing darkness. The wind picked up, whispering through the trees, carrying with it a faint sound, like distant voices. I strained to hear, but it was just a soft, unintelligible murmur. I told myself it was nothing, just the wind playing tricks on me. As night fell, I felt the temperature drop even further. I zipped up my jacket and added more wood to the fire. That's when I saw it. A flicker of light, deep in the woods. It was faint, almost like a candle flame, bobbing up and down, moving slowly among the trees. I squinted, trying to make out what it was. The light grew brighter, closer. My heart began to pound in my chest. It wasn't a flashlight or a lantern. It was too pale, too unnatural. I stood up, watching as the light continued to approach, weaving between the trees. Then it stopped, hovering just beyond the edge of my camp. I could see a figure now, a shadowy silhouette standing perfectly still, just outside the reach of the firelight. I felt a chill run down my spine, my breath coming in short, sharp bursts. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding thin and unsure. No response. The figure remained still, the light dimming, then growing brighter again, like a pulse. "Are you lost?" I asked, my voice louder this time, trying to sound more confident than I felt. But the figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching me. The light flickered again, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw a face, a pale, distorted face, staring back at me, its eyes wide and dark. I blinked, and the figure was gone. The light vanished, plunging the forest back into darkness. I felt a wave of cold wash over me. I backed up to the fire, grabbing a thick stick, holding it out like a weapon. Minutes passed. And I began to question if I had seen anything at all. Maybe it was just a trick of the light, or my imagination playing games. But the unease wouldn't leave me. The fire crackled louder, spitting embers into the air, and I heard something, a soft crunching sound, like footsteps on dry leaves, coming from behind me. I spun around, my heart racing. Nothing, just darkness. I turned back to the fire. But something was different. My backpack, which had been by my feet, was now several feet away, lying open. I hadn't moved it. I scanned the area, my hands shaking. My breath came out in shallow gasps, and my ears strained for any sound. I could feel eyes on me, hidden in the dark. I knew I wasn't alone anymore. I heard the footsteps again, closer now, circling around my camp. Twigs snapped, leaves rustled, but no matter where I turned, I couldn't see anyone. Panic gripped me. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it wildly into the trees, but all I could see were shadows and more shadows. Then I heard a faint giggle, a child's laugh. High-pitched, distant, but unmistakable. It sent a jolt of fear through my body. I whirled around, scanning the trees with the flashlight. The laughter came again. Closer this time. I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. A small figure darting between the trees. I called out, my voice breaking, "Who's there? Show yourself." The laughter stopped, and the woods fell silent again. I moved closer to the edge of the camp, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. I saw nothing but trees and shadows, and then, just as I was about to turn back, I felt it, a cold breath on the back of my neck. I whipped around, but there was no one there. I stumbled back to the fire, my heart hammering in my chest. I needed to get a grip. I sat down, trying to calm myself. I stared into the flames, their warmth a small comfort against the growing cold around me. Then from the other side of the fire I heard a voice, a whisper, soft and clear. "Come play with us." My blood ran cold. I stood up, shining my flashlight toward the sound, and saw them, 2 figures standing just beyond the firelight. 2 children, a boy and a girl, their faces pale and their clothes tattered and dirty. They stood hand in hand, their eyes wide and blank, their mouths stretched into unsettling smiles. "Come play with us," they repeated in unison. I backed away, my hands trembling. Who are you?" They didn't answer, just stared at me with those empty, unblinking eyes. I took another step back, my foot catching on a root. I stumbled, and when I looked up, they were gone. The fire flickered violently, almost going out, and I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. I needed to get out of here. I grabbed my pack, stuffing my things inside as quickly as I could. I tried to think clearly, to stay calm, but the air around me felt thick, suffocating. I heard whispers all around now, growing louder and more frantic. "Run! Run! Run! Run!" I turned towards the path that led back to my car, my flashlight bouncing with every step. The whispers seemed to follow, getting louder, more insistent. The shadows moved with me, shifting in the corners of my vision. I ran, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Then I saw it. The light again. Bobbing up and down, moving toward me. Faster this time. I heard the laughter, the footsteps all around, but I didn't stop. I kept running, pushing through the thick underbrush, branches clawing at my skin. Finally, I broke through the trees and saw my car, parked just where I had left it. I didn't look back. I didn't dare. I jumped in, started the engine, and floored it, gravel flying as I sped away from that cursed place. As I drove, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw them, those same 2 children standing at the edge of the woods, watching me leave. Their mouths open and wide, unnatural smiles. I haven't been back to Deadwood Camp since. But every now and then, when I'm alone, I hear that faint, distant laughter and feel the cold breath on the back of my neck.
It was supposed to be a perfect weekend. 4 of us, Mark, Jess, Tom, and I, had planned a camping trip deep in the Pinewood Forest. We all wanted to get away from the noise of the city and spend a couple of days in nature, just us in the wilderness. Mark, who always took the lead, had chosen the spot, a remote area near a small hidden lake, miles away from any other human being. We arrived at the campsite late in the afternoon. The pines towered over us, their tops lost in a blanket of gray clouds. The air was crisp, a kind of cold that hinted at how freezing the night would be. Mist curled around our ankles, snaking across the forest floor, like it had a mind of its own. "This place is perfect," Mark said, dropping his backpack with a grin. "No cell service, no other people. Just peace and quiet." Jess, ever the cautious one, glanced around, her brow furrowed. "It's really quiet," she said softly, almost like she was afraid the trees might hear her. Tom laughed. "Exactly, Jess. No noise, no distractions. This is exactly what we wanted." I felt a chill run down my spine, but I brushed it off. We quickly set up our tents as the sun dipped lower, painting the sky a deep orange. As darkness fell, we gathered around the campfire, the only light against the pressing shadows of the forest. I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling, though. The forest was too quiet, the silence too thick. I kept glancing over my shoulder, feeling like something was watching us. Then I heard it for the first time. A faint whisper. I turned my head, trying to listen, but the words were too soft, too far away. "Did anyone else hear that?" I asked. Mark looked up from the fire, his eyes curious. "Hear what?" "Whispering," I said. "It sounded like whispering." Tom rolled his eyes and grinned. "It's just the wind, Sarah. Relax." But it didn't sound like wind. It was different. Not a steady rustle of leaves, but soft and intermittent, like someone murmuring just out of earshot. Night fell quickly, and the blackness was like a shroud over the forest. The fire seemed to shrink under the weight of the dark, its light barely reaching beyond our small circle. We tried to distract ourselves with stories, most of them about old urban legends, and laughter that sounded forced and hollow in the dense night air. Then I heard it again, a twig snapping nearby. We all fell silent, looking at each other. "What was that?" Jess asked, her voice tight with fear. Mark waved his hand dismissively. "Probably just an animal." "Maybe," Tom added, but there was an edge to his voice. We sat in tense silence, listening, but there were no more noises, just the crackling of the fire and the far-off hoot of an owl. I tried to relax, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The whispering started again, louder this time. I turned my head, straining to make out the words, but it was still too faint. "Did you hear it?" I asked again, more urgently. Mark was about to tease me when he froze. He had heard it too. We all had. It was clearer now, more like a hushed conversation happening just beyond the firelight. What is that?" Jess whispered. Mark stood up, grabbing his flashlight. "It's probably just the wind or maybe someone else camping nearby." "There's no one else out here," Tom said, his voice barely more than a breath. I checked. "We're alone." Mark hesitated, the flashlight beam shaking slightly in his hand. "I'll go check it out," he said, trying to sound braver than he looked. He took a few steps toward the trees, the whispering growing louder in our ears, but as soon as he reached the edge of the light, it stopped. Silence. Mark turned back, forcing a smile. "See?" "Nothing," he said, but I could hear the tremor in his voice. We decided to call it a night, each of us retreating to our tents. But sleep didn't come easy. I lay on my sleeping bag, staring at the ceiling of my tent, listening. The whispering had stopped, but the silence was worse. I felt the weight of the dark pressing down on me like a heavy blanket. Then, I heard it again, closer this time. A branch snapped outside my tent. I held my breath, heart pounding in my ears. "Mark?" I whispered. "Is that you?" No answer. Then, the whispering returned, louder, more insistent. "Come out!" it hissed, just outside my tent flap. I bolted upright, scrambling for my flashlight. I unzipped the tent door just a crack, shining the light outside. The mist swirled in the cold air, but there was nothing there. I sat back, trying to calm my racing heart. I must have imagined it. It had to be my mind playing tricks. I lay back down, but the whispers came again, louder, right outside my tent. "Come out!" I couldn't stand it anymore. I grabbed my flashlight and burst out of my tent, almost colliding with Jess, who was pale and trembling. "What happened?" I gasped. "It was in my tent!" she cried, pointing behind her. Mark and Tom were up now, their faces drawn with fear. "What did you see?" Mark demanded. "I don't know," Jess stammered. A face right outside my tent." Tom looked uneasy. Maybe it was a shadow. "No," Jess snapped. "It was real. I saw it. right outside my tent. I felt a chill run down my spine. I heard whispering, I confessed. Something telling me to come out. Mark took charge, but his voice shook. This is just our minds playing tricks. The dark, the isolation. A loud crack interrupted him, followed by a deep, guttural growl. We turned, flashlights darting through the darkness. There, at the edge of the light, something moved. A tall, thin shape darting between the trees. Tom swore under his breath. What was that? We stood frozen, trying to make sense of what we were seeing. The whispers began again, this time louder, surrounding us, coming from every direction. The air grew colder, our breath visible in the flashlight beams. Maybe we should leave, Mark suggested, his confidence gone. Before I could respond, the whispering stopped. The silence was deafening. Then a voice boomed out from the darkness, low and malevolent. You should not have come here. Panic took over. Run! Mark shouted. We grabbed whatever we could and sprinted through the dense undergrowth. The trees seemed to close in on us, their branches tearing at our clothes, our skin. The whispers followed, louder, frenzied, chasing us. I stumbled, and Mark caught me. Come on, he urged, pulling me to my feet. We ran until we couldn't hear the whispers anymore, until our lungs burned and our legs felt like they would give out. Finally, we stopped in a small clearing, panting, our eyes wild. What was that? Jess gasped, clutching her chest. I don't know, Mark admitted, looking over his shoulder, his face pale. But we need to keep moving. We need to find the road. We kept walking, slower this time, every noise making us jump. The forest felt darker, more sinister, and the mist thicker, making it hard to see. Then we heard it again, the whispering closer this time. We picked up our pace, fear driving us forward. Tom stumbled and fell. Wait, he cried. But we didn't stop. I turned just in time to see him disappear, swallowed by the mist. Tom! I screamed, my voice breaking. No answer, only the whispering, louder now, almost mocking. Mark grabbed my arm. We can't stay here. We have to go. But Tom... He's gone, Sarah. We have to go, Mark shouted, his voice desperate. We ran again, not daring to look back. The forest seemed endless, a maze of trees and shadows. The whispers chased us, growing louder and louder, until they were a deafening roar in my ears. Finally, the trees parted, and we stumbled onto the dirt road. Relief washed over use, but it didn't last. The whispers were still there, closer than ever. We ran down the road, terrified. The whispering grew louder, more frantic, a cacophony of voices all around us. Then, I saw it, our car, parked at the trailhead. We sprinted toward it, fumbling with the keys. Come on, Jess urged, panic in her voice. Mark got the door open, and we piled in, slamming the door shut. He turned the key, and the engine roared to life. We sped down the road, headlights cutting through the darkness. The whispering faded behind us, replaced by the sound of our ragged breathing. We didn't stop until we were miles away, back on the highway, the forest a distant, dark shadow in the rearview mirror. We never spoke of what happened again. We didn't need to. We all knew something evil lurked in Pinewood Forest, something that had awakened the moment we entered its domain. But weeks later, the whispers started again. At first, they were faint, almost like a memory. But now they are growing louder, and I fear that they will never stop. I fear that Pinewood Forest will never let me go.
I've been up here for days now. I don't know how many exactly. The numbers have started to blur together, like the branches of the trees surrounding me. I thought coming up to this cabin in the woods would be a good way to clear my head. I needed a break from work, from my life, and most of all, from my own thoughts. But now I wish I'd never come. The cabin is old, made of thick, weathered logs that creak in the wind. It stands alone on a ridge, overlooking a deep valley that stretches out endlessly in every direction. I chose this place because it was isolated, far from any roads or towns. A friend of a friend owned it, and they promised I wouldn't be disturbed. No Wi-Fi, no cell service, nothing but the silence of the woods. It seemed perfect at the time. The first few days were peaceful enough. I spent my time hiking, reading, and just sitting on the porch, staring out at the trees. I even slept well. For the first time in months, I felt calm. But on the third night, things began to change. It was the noises that woke me up, strange noises coming from outside the cabin. At first, I thought it was just an animal, maybe a deer or a fox. But then I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate, crunching footsteps moving around the cabin. They stopped and started again, like whoever or whatever was out there was circling, pacing around me in the darkness. I got out of bed and went to the window, careful not to make a sound. The moon was full, casting a silver glow over the clearing around the cabin. I peered out into the darkness, but I couldn't see anyone. Still, the footsteps continued, crunching slowly over the fallen leaves and twigs. I told myself it was just the wind, just my imagination. But the next night, it happened again. The same slow footsteps, the same feeling of something circling the cabin. I stayed in bed, listening, my heart pounding in my chest. I wanted to believe it was just an animal, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. The third night, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed the flashlight from the kitchen drawer and flung the door open, shouting into the darkness, "Who's out there?" The footsteps stopped. For a moment, everything was silent. Then, from somewhere in the trees, I heard a voice, a low, raspy whisper that sent chills down my spine. "Come outside," it said. "Come and see." I slammed the door shut, my hands trembling. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the floor, with my back against the wall, clutching the flashlight like a weapon. I waited for the footsteps to start again, but they never did. The next morning, I found tracks around the cabin. They were human tracks, but strange, elongated, as if the person making them had been dragging their feet. I decided I'd had enough. I packed my things, threw them into the trunk of my car, and turned the key in the ignition. Nothing. The engine didn't even try to turn over. I checked the battery, the fuel, everything I could think of. Everything seemed fine, but the car wouldn't start. It was as if it had simply died in the night, along with my sense of safety. That's when I saw it, on the edge of the clearing, just at the tree line. A figure, tall, thin, wrapped in shadows. I blinked, and it was gone. My heart was racing, and I felt a cold sweat trickling down my spine. I grabbed my things and went back inside, locking the door behind me. I tried to call for help, but there was no signal, no way to reach anyone. I was completely alone, stranded up here with whatever was out there. The days passed in a blur. I barely slept, barely ate. Every night the footsteps returned closer and closer until they were just outside the cabin walls. I started hearing whispers through the thin wooden walls, soft and distant at first, but growing louder each night. They sounded like my own voice, echoing back at me, repeating the same thing over and over. "Come outside. Come and see." Yesterday, I found something new outside. A pile of stones, carefully stacked in front of the door. I kicked them over, trying not to think about what it meant. But they were back again this morning, taller this time, almost reaching the door handle. I've started to feel like I'm losing my mind. I can't tell if the things I'm seeing are real or just figments of my sleep-deprived brain. Last night, I woke up to find a figure standing in the corner of my bedroom. I froze, too terrified to move. I could only see its outline, tall and thin, its head almost touching the ceiling. It didn't move, didn't make a sound, but I could feel its eyes on me, watching. I closed my eyes, counting to 10, telling myself it wasn't real. When I opened them, the figure was gone, but the feeling of being watched remained. Today, I found another pile of stones, this time inside the cabin, right in the center of the living room. I don't know how it got there. I don't know how anything is happening anymore. I just know I need to get out. I've been walking for hours, trying to find a way back to civilization, but the woods are like a maze. No matter which direction I go, I always end up back at the cabin. The sun is starting to set now, and I can feel the fear creeping in again, the cold, creeping dread that I'm not alone. I'm back at the cabin now. I don't want to go inside, but I have nowhere else to go. The trees seem to close in around me, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands, trapping me in this place. I'm so tired, so hungry, I feel like I'm going mad. As the darkness falls, I hear the footsteps again, louder this time, closer. They stop just outside the door, and I hear the whispering start. It's my voice again, distorted and echoing, but I can hear it clearer now. Come outside. Come and see. I don't want to. I'm terrified of what I might see, but I know I can't stay in here forever. I take a deep breath, my hand on the doorknob. The whispers grow louder, almost deafening now. Come outside. Come and see. I don't know what's out there, waiting for me in the darkness, but I have to know. I have to see. I twist the doorknob, and the door creaks open. The footsteps stop. The whispering stops. For a moment, there's nothing but silence, the cold night air biting at my skin. I step outside, flashlight in hand, and sweep the beam across the clearing. Nothing. The clearing is empty, the trees silent and still. I take a few steps forward, my breath fogging in the chill night air. And then I see it. A shape, standing at the edge of the woods, just beyond the reach of my flashlight. It's tall, thin, its limbs unnaturally long, its face hidden in shadow. My heart pounds in my chest, and I feel a scream rising in my throat, but I can't move, can't make a sound. The shape steps forward, just enough that I can see its face. It's me. It looks exactly like me, down to the clothes I'm wearing, the expression on my face, the terror in my eyes. It smiles. A wide, unnatural smile that stretches across its face like a wound. And then it speaks, in my voice, but distorted, wrong. Come outside. Come and see. I drop the flashlight, and the darkness swallows me whole. I don't know how long I stand there, frozen, unable to move, unable to think. The shape steps closer, its smile growing wider, its eyes black and empty. I want to run, to scream, to do anything, but I'm paralyzed with fear. It reaches out a hand, long fingers stretching toward me, and I feel the cold touch of its skin on mine. And then everything goes black. When I wake up, I'm back in the cabin. The sun is rising, casting a pale light through the windows. I feel a strange sense of calm, like the fear has drained out of me, replaced by something else, something darker. I get up, walk to the door, and step outside. The clearing is empty, the trees silent and still. I turn to look at the cabin, and for a moment I see a figure, standing in the doorway, watching me. It looks like me, but it's not me, not anymore. I smile, and the figure smiles back, and I hear the whispering start again in my own voice, echoing through the trees. Come outside. Come and see. And now, I understand. I understand what I have to do. I turn and walk into the woods, the whispers growing louder with each step, guiding me deeper and deeper into the darkness. I don't know where I'm going, but it doesn't matter. I'm not alone anymore.
Number